Emily had been in a deep coma for 5 long years. Her family and doctors had almost given up hope, believing she would never wake up. The doctors told her parents that they should prepare themselves for the worst. They couldn't understand why she wasn't showing any signs of recovery. Her parents visited her every day, holding on to the faintest glimmer of hope, but even they knew that time was running out. Emily's body was there, but her spirit seemed lost in the quiet darkness of the coma. Then, one morning, something strange happened. The hospital room was quiet as usual, the hum of machines filling the air. But suddenly, Emily's hand twitched. Her fingers moved slightly, just enough to catch the eye of the nurse who was checking the monitors. The nurse paused, unsure if she was imagining things. It had been years since Emily had shown any signs of life. She quickly moved closer to the bed, checking the vitals and watching carefully. Emily's hand twitched again, and this time, the nurse's heart skipped a beat. She rushed to press the call button, her voice trembling as she called for the doctors. Within minutes, doctors and nurses flooded into the room. They looked at each other in disbelief. Could it be? Was Emily really waking up after all this time? The machines beeped, and the room filled with tension. Everyone stood around her bed, waiting for any sign that this was real. And then, it happened. Emily's eyes fluttered open. At first, her gaze was unfocused, unsure of what was happening around her. The bright light of the hospital room hurt her eyes, and she blinked several times, trying to adjust to the strange world she had woken up to. The nurse gently touched her shoulder, speaking softly. "Emily, can you hear me?" Her voice was calm, but there was a note of excitement in it that couldn't be hidden. Emily's eyes moved slowly towards the nurse, and for a moment, she looked confused, as if she didn't recognize the face in front of her. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. It was as if she was trapped in a fog, unable to fully process what was happening. The doctor quickly stepped in, his face full of questions. "Emily, it's Dr. Harris. Do you know where you are?" he asked gently, trying to keep his voice steady. Emily's eyes moved around the room, but it was clear she didn't understand what was going on. She tried to speak again, but only a faint whisper escaped her lips. Her hand moved to her head, as if she was trying to remember something, anything. Suddenly, her breath caught, and her eyes widened. She looked directly at Dr. Harris, her gaze sharp and full of fear. "The accident," she whispered hoarsely. Her voice was weak, but there was a sudden awareness in her eyes. The room fell silent as everyone waited for her to say more. But then, just as quickly as the fear had appeared, it was gone. Emily's face softened, and she looked confused again. I don't remember," she said, her voice trembling. The nurse tried to reassure her, but Emily's mind was racing. She had vague memories of a crash, of being trapped, but they felt distant, like a bad dream she couldn't fully recall. The doctor gently placed a hand on her arm. "Take it easy, Emily. You've been through a lot. We'll help you remember, okay?" But as the doctor spoke, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Something about the way Emily had spoken just now. It wasn't just confusion. There was something else behind her words, something hidden. Emily's eyes fluttered again, and for a moment, she seemed to drift in and out of consciousness. She had the faintest smile on her face, but it wasn't a peaceful one. It was as if she was remembering something troubling, something she couldn't yet explain. Her fingers twitched again, and she squeezed her eyes shut as though trying to block out a memory. "Emily," Dr. Harris asked softly, his voice now filled with concern. She didn't respond right away, but her lips moved, almost as though she was trying to say something. "I remember," she whispered so quietly that only the doctor and the nurse could hear. Her voice was barely audible, like a secret she wasn't sure she should share. "I remember everything. But I shouldn't," she added, her voice trembling. Her words sent a chill through the room. The nurse exchanged a worried glance with the doctor. Emily's eyes slowly opened again, but there was something different about her. It wasn't just the confusion. There was a sense of fear and something darker hiding behind her eyes. Dr. Harris felt his heart race. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but something told him this wasn't just the result of a long coma. "Emily, what do you mean?" Dr. Harris asked, his voice gentle but filled with growing unease. Emily's lips parted again, but before she could speak, the room suddenly grew colder. A strange sensation filled the air, and Dr. Harris felt a knot in his stomach. Something was wrong, and he wasn't sure what it was. Emily's eyes shifted away from the doctor, and she stared blankly at the wall. It was clear that whatever she had just remembered, it wasn't something she wanted to talk about. The tension in the room was thick, and everyone stood there, unsure of what was coming next. The doctors and nurses exchanged nervous glances, knowing that this was just the beginning of something much bigger than they had imagined. In that moment, Emily's awakening was no longer just about her coming back to life. It was about what she had remembered. Something dark, something terrible, and now, the real question was, what was she hiding? Emily's memories started to flood back, but not in the way she expected. At first, it was just fragments, small pieces of her life before the accident. She remembered her family, the warm summer days, and the feeling of being safe. But those memories were quickly overshadowed by the darkness of the event that had caused her coma. The accident, the crash, the voices, they kept echoing in her mind, growing louder, until they seemed to fill the room. She closed her eyes, trying to shut out the images racing through her head, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't escape them. The memory of the car crash was clearer now, much clearer than before. She saw the flashing lights, the sounds of sirens, and the panic in her own voice as she screamed for help. She remembered the way the car had flipped, how it felt like the world was spinning out of control. And then, everything went dark. But now, waking up, there was more to the memory, something she hadn't noticed before. She remembered hearing voices, whispering. People she knew, people she thought she could trust, had been talking about her. Their words were faint at first, like whispers in the background, but now they were becoming clearer. They were saying things that didn't make sense. She can't know. She mustn't wake up. The words chilled her to the bone. Who said that? Emily whispered under her breath, her voice barely audible. Her pulse quickened, and she glanced nervously around the room, as though someone might be standing just out of sight. The doctor, noticing her growing anxiety, stepped closer, trying to calm her. "Emily, try to relax. You've been through a lot. Just take your time and breathe." But his words seemed distant, like they were fading away as Emily's mind focused on something else, something she couldn't quite grasp. As the room remained eerily silent, Emily's gaze shifted to the window. She could see the trees outside swaying in the wind, but her mind was somewhere else. The memory of those whispers grew louder, and her heart raced as she recalled them in detail. They were talking about her, about what had happened to her, and it felt like a secret was being kept from her, something that, if she found out, would change everything. She looked at Dr. Harris again, but this time her eyes were different. They were searching, looking for answers he wasn't ready to give. "What happened?" she asked, her voice trembling with the weight of her confusion. "Why was I in that coma? Why didn't anyone tell me what happened?" The doctor hesitated for a moment, his eyes flickering with uncertainty. He was a professional, but Emily's questions were starting to make him uncomfortable. It wasn't just the fact that she was awake. It was the way she was asking about the accident, the way she seemed to already know something she shouldn't. "I think it's best if you take things slowly, Emily," he said, trying to reassure her. "You've been through a very traumatic event. It's going to take some time to remember everything." But Emily wasn't satisfied with his answer. There was a nagging feeling in the back of her mind, a feeling that something was wrong. The way he spoke, the way he avoided her gaze, it all felt like he was hiding something. Her suspicion grew stronger, and she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to her accident than she was being told. "I'm not a child, Dr. Harris, Emily said firmly, her voice a little stronger now. I remember the crash. I remember the sound of the tires screeching, the glass shattering. But there's something more, something I'm not being told. The doctor's face stiffened, his eyes narrowing slightly. Emily caught the change in his expression, and it didn't escape her notice. There was fear in his eyes, something that wasn't there before. The room felt colder now, and she shivered despite the warmth of the hospital room. The nurse, sensing the tension, stepped forward, trying to ease the situation. Emily, it's okay, she said in a soothing voice. You've been through a lot. It's normal to feel confused. But Emily wasn't listening anymore. Her mind was racing, and her heart pounded in her chest. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that something wasn't right. She had been in that coma for 5 years, but she had never been told the full story. People had been acting like they were protecting her, hiding something from her. And now, the memory of those whispers, the ones saying she couldn't wake up, that she shouldn't know, made her feel like she was part of something bigger, something dangerous. I need to know the truth, Emily said, her voice shaking with urgency. Tell me what happened to me. Tell me who was involved. Dr. Harris and the nurse exchanged a quick, worried glance. They didn't know how to respond to her request. Emily's questions were too pointed, too specific. It was clear that she wasn't just remembering the accident. She was remembering something more, something that terrified her. Emily could see their hesitation, and the fear in their eyes confirmed her suspicions. She was right. There was something they were hiding, and she was going to find out what it was. She just needed to figure out who was hiding the truth from her. And why. The room seemed to close in around her, and Emily felt a cold chill run down her spine. She was no longer just trying to piece together the events of her accident. She was searching for answers to a much darker question. What had really happened to her? And why was everyone so afraid of her remembering? Emily's mind raced as she processed the fear and confusion swirling inside her. The memory of the accident was still vivid, but now it felt like a puzzle that was missing pieces. Every time she tried to fit the pieces together, they didn't quite align. And the more she thought about it, the more she felt something terrible was hidden beneath the surface. Her eyes darted around the hospital room, searching for answers, but there were none to be found. Dr. Harris stood at the foot of her bed, his face tense, and the nurse hovered near the door, glancing nervously at Emily as if unsure how to respond. The silence was thick with unspoken words, and Emily couldn't stand it any longer. She needed to know the truth. She looked directly at Dr. Harris, her voice stronger now. You know more than you're telling me, she said, her tone filled with quiet accusation. You're hiding something. What happened to me, really? Dr. Harris shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the nurse for support, but neither of them spoke. The air between them felt heavy, as if they were all keeping something from Emily that she desperately needed to understand. Her mind raced, and a cold sense of dread began to creep over her. I was in a coma for 5 years, Dr. Harris, Emily continued, her voice trembling with frustration. 5 years. People don't just wake up from that. What really happened? Why was I in that car? And who was with me? The doctor's eyes widened slightly, and Emily could see the panic building in his expression. He wasn't just avoiding her questions, he was afraid of them. She noticed the way his hand twitched, as though he was about to say something, but kept hesitating. There was more to this story than just a simple accident. Before he could respond, Emily's thoughts shifted to the whispers she had heard in her fragmented memories. The voices in the dark, speaking in hushed tones. She remembered them now, clearer than ever. She can't know. She mustn't wake up. The words echoed in her mind again, and her chest tightened. Who had been talking about her? And why did they want her to stay asleep? Why are you afraid of telling me the truth? Emily asked quietly, her voice breaking the heavy silence in the room. Dr. Harris looked at her, his face pale. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His eyes darted to the nurse, then back to Emily, his mind clearly racing. Emily could sense the fear in his hesitation. This wasn't just about the accident. It was something far darker, something that had to do with the people around her, something they wanted to keep buried. The nurse stepped forward, her face softening as she looked at Emily. "Emily, please, you've been through so much. It's hard for anyone to talk about these things all at once. You just need time to heal." But Emily wasn't buying it. She wasn't going to let them brush her off any longer. Something wasn't right, and the more they avoided her questions, the more she felt the danger lurking just beneath the surface. "No," Emily said firmly, her voice breaking through the nurse's attempts to calm her down. "I need to know what happened. I need to know who was involved." The nurse's expression faltered, and for the first time, Emily saw a flicker of guilt in her eyes. It was subtle, but it was there. The nurse was hiding something too. Emily's heart raced as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. There was something sinister at play here. And it wasn't just about a car crash. Dr. Harris finally spoke, his voice low and strained. "It's complicated, Emily. There are things you're not ready to hear yet." He glanced at the door nervously, as though worried someone might overhear them. Emily could sense his discomfort, and it only fueled her suspicions. "Why aren't you telling me the truth?" Emily demanded, her voice growing more desperate. "What happened to me? Who did this to me?" Dr. Harris shook his head, his face pale. He looked like he was about to speak again, but his words got stuck in his throat. He couldn't say it. Whatever it was, the truth was too dangerous, too terrifying for him to admit, and Emily knew it. The nurse stepped back, wringing her hands. "Emily, we're doing everything we can. Please, just give it time." But Emily wasn't going to wait. She wasn't going to sit here and let them control the story anymore. She needed answers. Desperate for any clue, she searched her memory, focusing on the voices she had heard in the dark, the fragmented images, the fear in the people around her. And then it hit her, something so simple yet so terrifying. The people who had been around her, the ones she trusted, had been part of something bigger, something that was connected to the crash, to her coma, and to the whispers she'd heard. They hadn't been trying to help her. They had been trying to keep her quiet. Emily felt her stomach drop as the realization sank in. "You're hiding something," she whispered again. But this time, the words felt heavier, darker. "And I'm going to find out what it is." For the first time since waking up, Emily felt a chill run down her spine. The sense of danger she had felt since the moment she opened her eyes was no longer just a feeling. It was a reality. The people she had trusted, the people who had been around her, were part of something terrible, something that she wasn't supposed to know. As the doctor and nurse stood there, their silence spoke volumes. They weren't going to tell her the truth. She was going to have to find it on her own. And Emily knew that the road ahead was going to be filled with secrets, lies, and a terrifying truth she wasn't sure she was ready to uncover. But one thing was clear. She wasn't going to let anyone keep her in the dark. Not anymore. Emily's mind was on fire, her thoughts racing faster than she could keep up with them. The truth, whatever it was just out of reach, but she could feel it lurking beneath the surface. Every word Dr. Harris had said, every hesitation, only deepened the mystery. They were hiding something from her, and as much as they tried to keep her calm, she knew now that she couldn't trust them, not completely. Her pulse quickened as she glanced toward the door. The nurse was still standing by it, eyes darting nervously, her hands shaking ever so slightly. Emily could tell she was avoiding her gaze. Dr. Harris, on the other hand, looked like he was considering running. The thought made Emily's stomach turn. These people weren't just doctors and nurses. They were part of the puzzle, and they knew things she didn't. The room felt suffocating, the air thick with unspoken words. Emily's hands clenched the sheets on her bed as she fought to steady her breathing. Her mind flashed back to the whispers, the ones that had haunted her in her coma. She could almost hear them again. She mustn't wake up. Why? Why were they so afraid of her waking up? What had happened while she was unconscious? She couldn't shake the feeling that her accident wasn't an accident at all. The more she thought about it, the more it seemed like there was something intentional about it. Her heart ached with the possibility. Had someone done this to her? Had someone made sure she stayed asleep for all these years? And who? The question echoed in her mind, louder with every passing second. Who? Her eyes flicked back to Dr. Harris, and for the first time since waking up, she saw a crack in his calm demeanor. The way he looked at her now wasn't just concerned, it was fearful. The faint tremor in his voice was barely noticeable, but Emily caught it. "Emily," he said quietly, his voice softer than before. "You've been through something unimaginable. But I think it's time we give you some space. Let you rest." "No," Emily snapped, her voice sharp and firm. "I'm not resting. I need to know what happened. I need to know who's behind this." Dr. Harris hesitated, his eyes darting away from hers. His expression hardened as if he was trying to hold back a tidal wave of truth. "You don't understand. It's not that simple," he murmured, his gaze shifting nervously to the nurse, who seemed just as uneasy. "The truth is dangerous. You're not ready for it. Tell me." Emily's voice was low but firm, a stark contrast to the terror growing in her chest. She wasn't going to back down. Not now. She had been in the dark for too long, and whatever the truth was, she had to face it. The doctor's lips parted, as if he were about to say something, but he quickly closed them again. Emily could see his jaw clench, his mind racing, weighing the decision to tell her the truth against the consequences of doing so. The nurse finally spoke, her voice trembling. "Emily, please. It's not the right time. We'll explain everything to you when you're ready. For now, just rest." But Emily was done waiting. She could feel the walls closing in on her, and with every word of their refusal, the pressure mounted. It was clear they were trying to protect her, but from what? What were they hiding? "No," Emily said again, this time more forcefully. "Tell me what you're hiding. Tell me now." The doctor's face paled, and the nurse stepped forward as if to block him from speaking any further. But it was too late. Dr. Harris' resolve finally broke, and he let out a deep sigh, his shoulders slumping with the weight of what he was about to say. "Emily, it's not just about the accident," he whispered, his voice barely audible, as though saying it aloud might make it real. "It's what happened before, what happened after." Emily's heart pounded in her chest, and she leaned in, desperate to hear every word. The nurse stood frozen at the door, looking as though she was preparing to run. But Emily didn't care anymore. She needed the truth, and she was willing to do whatever it took to get it. "The crash. It was no accident," Dr. Harris finally said, his voice trembling as the truth spilled out. "Someone caused it. Someone made sure you were in that car. And they made sure you didn't wake up." Emily's breath caught in her throat. The world seemed to tilt on its axis as she processed his words. "Who?" she whispered, almost too afraid to ask. "Who did this to me?" Dr. Harris closed his eyes, and for a moment, he looked like he was about to break down. He opened them again, his gaze heavy with regret. "I can't say. I don't know who's involved. But I can tell you this. You were never meant to wake up, Emily. Not ever." The words sent a shockwave through her, and Emily felt like the ground had been ripped out from under her. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. But a part of her, the part that had always known something wasn't right, understood now. She had been the target of something far bigger than just a simple accident. Dr. Harris took a step back, his voice trembling. "You were in the coma for so long because someone didn't want you to remember. They didn't want you to find out the truth." Emily felt a chill spread through her as she grasped the enormity of what he was saying. She had been in the dark, literally and figuratively, for 5 years because someone close to her, had wanted to keep her silent. The realization hit her like a wave crashing over her, and she shuddered at the thought of the people who might have been involved. But she couldn't stop now. She needed to find out who and why. The truth was out there, and she was going to uncover it, no matter the cost. As Dr. Harris backed away, his eyes filled with sorrow, Emily made a vow to herself. She would uncover the secrets they had hidden from her. No one would keep her in the dark anymore. Not now. Not ever. Emily's heart raced as the gravity of Dr. Harris' words sank in. The realization that her coma hadn't been an accident, that someone had actively tried to keep her from waking up, made her feel like she was trapped in a nightmare. Her mind swirled with confusion, fear, and a sense of betrayal. Who could have done this to her? Why would anyone want to hurt her like this? Dr. Harris took a step back, his hands wringing nervously in front of him. The nurse, still standing by the door, had her hand pressed against the wall, as if she were ready to flee at any moment. Emily could feel the tension in the room. There were too many unspoken words, too many secrets hidden in the shadows. Who would do this to me? Emily whispered, her voice shaky but determined. Who wanted me to stay in a coma? The doctor's face went pale, and Emily could see him struggling with the decision of whether or not to tell her more. The silence in the room was suffocating, and she could feel the weight of their reluctance to speak. Finally, Dr. Harris looked up at her, his eyes filled with sorrow and regret. I can't give you all the answers right now, Emily. There are things that I can't talk about. But I can tell you this, there are people who have been watching you, people who made sure you stayed asleep for 5 years. Emily's stomach churned, and she felt the sharp sting of betrayal. The people who had taken care of her, her family, her doctors, the nurses who had come in to check on her, had all been part of this. No one had told her the truth. No one had told her she had been targeted. Who? Emily demanded again, her voice growing more urgent. Who are these people? Why did they do this? Dr. Harris shook his head slowly, unable or unwilling to answer. I'm sorry. I wish I could help you more. But there are things you aren't ready to hear. You need to focus on your recovery. Recovery. Emily's voice cracked with frustration. You mean staying quiet, pretending everything is normal while you hide the truth from me? The nurse, who had been silent up until now, finally spoke. Emily, please. You've been through so much already. It's not safe to push too hard right now. You need time to heal, to process all of this. Her voice was soft, but the fear in it was undeniable. Emily could see the nurse's nervous glance toward Dr. Harris, as if they were both in on a secret they weren't ready to share. Time to heal. Emily repeated, her voice rising with anger. I've spent 5 years of my life in a coma. How much more time do I need? The doctor and nurse exchanged another quick look, and for a brief moment, it seemed like they were about to say something crucial. But instead they fell silent again, their faces blank, unwilling to give any more information. Why won't you tell me? Emily asked, her voice breaking. She was so tired of the lies, so tired of being kept in the dark. All she wanted was the truth, the full truth. Dr. Harris finally spoke again, his voice barely audible. If you knew everything, Emily, it would change you. It would change everything. The weight of his words settled over her like a thick fog. She could see it in his eyes. He wasn't just trying to protect her. He was scared of what she might uncover. Emily knew then that the truth wasn't just dangerous for her. It was dangerous for everyone involved. Emily looked around the room, feeling trapped. She couldn't stay here. Not like this. Not with so many unanswered questions. She needed to get out. She needed to find the truth, even if it meant going against everything they were telling her. I'm leaving, she said firmly, her voice strong despite the fear gnawing at her insides. I'm not staying here until you tell me what happened. I'll find out on my own. The doctor and nurse exchanged another panicked glance. They knew she wasn't bluffing. Emily wasn't going to sit around and wait for them to hand her the answers. She was done being their patient. She was done being a pawn in their game. Emily, please don't do this, the nurse begged, stepping forward as if to stop her. But Emily stood up, shaking off the nurse's gentle grasp. I have to do this, she said, her voice steady, even though her heart was pounding in her chest. "I have to find out the truth, even if it means doing it alone." She pushed past them, her steps quick and determined. The hospital hallways seemed endless, and as she moved further from the room, Emily felt a sense of urgency settle over her. She couldn't let them control her anymore. She had to find out who was behind this, who had caused her coma, and why they'd gone to such lengths to keep her in the dark. But the deeper she went, the more she felt the eyes of the people around her. Whispers followed her, the same whispers she had heard in her coma. "She's awake. She can't know. She mustn't find out." The words echoed in her mind, and they felt like a warning. As she walked through the hospital, Emily began to realize just how deep the conspiracy went. It wasn't just the people in the hospital who were hiding things from her. It was everyone. Her family, her friends. No one had told her the truth about what had happened to her. And as Emily pushed forward, her resolve hardening with every step, she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to stop until she uncovered the terrifying secret behind her coma. No matter who she had to confront, no matter what it took, the truth was waiting for her, and she was determined to find it. Emily's heart thudded in her chest as she moved through the hospital hallways. The farther she got from the room where Dr. Harris and the nurse had tried to stop her, the more she felt the weight of their fear pressing on her. They were scared of the truth she was about to uncover. But Emily couldn't stop now. She needed answers, and she wasn't going to let anyone stand in her way. As she walked, she could feel eyes following her, the whispers of the staff growing louder in her mind. She had to shake them off, focus on what she needed to do. She had no idea where to start, but one thing was clear. She couldn't trust anyone in this hospital. There was something dark hiding beneath the surface, and she would find it, no matter how long it took. Suddenly, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned, her pulse racing, and saw a man in a suit walking briskly down the hallway toward her. His face was unfamiliar, but there was something about the way he moved, calm, controlled, that made her instinctively tense up. "Miss Emily, right?" The man's voice was smooth, almost too smooth, and the way he said her name made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. He wasn't someone from the hospital staff, but he was clearly here for her. Emily's mind raced. Who was he? How did he know her name? "Who are you?" she asked, her voice cold with suspicion. She didn't want to show fear, but she couldn't help it. Something about this man felt wrong. "My name is Michael," he said, his smile polite but distant. "I work with the people who've been looking after you." Emily's stomach twisted in knots. She didn't know who he meant by the people who've been looking after you, but she had a bad feeling about it. The word looking felt off. He wasn't just talking about doctors or nurses. He was talking about something bigger, something deeper. "What do you want with me?" Emily demanded, taking a step back. She wanted to turn and run, but she couldn't let fear control her. "Not now." "I'm here to help you," Michael said, his tone smooth as he took a step closer. "You've been through a lot. I understand your need to know the truth, but the truth you're seeking is dangerous. It's better if you don't get involved." Emily's mind spun. This man was telling her to stay away from the very thing she needed most, the truth. Her instincts screamed that he was part of the web of secrets that had kept her in the dark for so long. "No," Emily said firmly, her voice unwavering. "I need to know what happened. I need to know who did this to me." Michael's smile faltered for just a moment, and Emily saw a flicker of something. Fear, guilt, it was hard to tell, but she didn't miss it. He was hiding something, and she was getting closer to the truth. "Please," Michael said, his voice dropping an octave. "This is for your own safety. You're not ready for the kind of people you're dealing with. Trust me, it's better if you let it go." Emily shook her head. "I'm not letting this go. I've been asleep for 5 years, and now I wake up to find out my whole life has been a lie. I'm not stopping until I get answers." For a brief moment, the coldness in Michael's eyes made her doubt herself. There was a coldness in him that was unsettling, like he had no real care for her well-being. He wasn't here to help. He was here to stop her from uncovering the truth. "You don't understand," Michael said, his tone more urgent now. "There are forces at play here that you can't even imagine. If you keep pushing, you're putting yourself in danger. People will do anything to keep the truth buried. Anything." Emily's blood ran cold. She had been trying to tell herself that everything would be okay, that she could figure it out on her own. But hearing Michael's words made her realize just how serious this was. Whoever was behind her coma had a lot of power, and they weren't going to let her find out the truth without a fight. "I'm not afraid of them," Emily said, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. "You can try to stop me, but I won't back down." Michael's expression hardened, and for a split second, Emily thought she saw a flicker of something dangerous in his eyes. But just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by his smooth, controlled exterior. "I warned you," he said quietly, and before Emily could respond, he turned and walked away, disappearing around the corner of the hallway. Emily stood there for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. She had just encountered someone who was part of the dark force she had been trying to uncover, and for the first time, she realized the depth of the danger she was in. Whoever was behind this, whoever had kept her in a coma for 5 years, had resources, power, and a willingness to do anything to keep her from finding out the truth. But Emily wasn't backing down. She couldn't. She had already lost 5 years of her life, and there was no way she was going to lose any more. If she had to go against everything, everyone, to uncover the truth, then so be it. She turned and continued down the hallway, her resolve stronger than ever. The truth was out there, and she was going to find it, no matter what it took. Emily felt the weight of her decision settle heavily in her chest. As she continued walking through the hospital, every step she took seemed to echo louder in the silence around her. Her thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion, fear, and determination. Michael's warning, the coldness in his eyes, had shaken her, but more than that, it had lit a fire inside her. He had just confirmed that the truth was far more dangerous than she had imagined, and that made her even more determined to find it. She reached the elevator and pressed the button, her hands trembling slightly as she waited. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming now, and she couldn't shake the sensation that someone, maybe even multiple people, were keeping tabs on her. Michael had tried to warn her off, but that only made her want to push harder. She couldn't let fear control her. She couldn't let them control her. The elevator doors finally opened with a soft ding, and Emily stepped inside, her mind racing. She needed a plan. She couldn't just wander the hospital aimlessly. She needed information, and she needed to find someone who might help her, someone who wasn't part of the web of lies she'd been tangled in for so long. The elevator ride felt like it took an eternity, but when the doors opened to the hospital's main floor, Emily stepped out into the bustling hallway. People walked past her without sparing a glance, but she could feel the tension in the air. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that the hospital was likely the key to everything. If she could get access to the records, the files, the information they were keeping from her, she might be able to piece together what had really happened. Her thoughts were interrupted by a nurse passing by, her name tag reading Jessica. Emily caught her eye, and without thinking, she reached out. "Wait," she called softly, her voice almost a whisper. Jessica paused, her face tight with a forced smile as she looked at Emily. I need help," Emily said, her voice shaking slightly, though she was trying her best to keep calm. "I need to know what happened. Can you help me find out?" The nurse's smile faltered, and for a split second, Emily saw fear flash in her eyes. Jessica glanced around nervously, her hands twitching at her sides, before she leaned in closer. "You shouldn't be asking questions like that," she whispered, her voice low. "There are people who will get angry if they find out you're looking into things." Emily's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? Who are you talking about?" Jessica's eyes darted to the left, and then the right, as if she was making sure no one was listening. She leaned in even closer, her voice barely audible now. You don't know who you're dealing with, Emily. There are people, powerful people, who will stop at nothing to keep the truth from coming out. They're everywhere. They've been watching you, watching all of us. If you keep digging, you'll be in danger. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She was hearing the same warning again, but this time, it felt more real. There was fear in Jessica's voice. Real, raw fear, and it made Emily's resolve grow stronger. I don't care, Emily said, her voice steady despite the panic swirling inside her. I need to know. I need to know who did this to me, why they did it, and what happened during all those years I was asleep. Jessica shook her head, her eyes wide with panic. Please, just let it go. You're not going to like what you find. People have died trying to uncover the truth. You don't want to go down that road. Emily felt a chill run down her spine at the mention of death. But she couldn't stop now. She had come too far. I don't care what happens, Emily said fiercely, her eyes locked with Jessica's. I'm not going to be afraid anymore. For a long moment, Jessica stared at her, and Emily could see the conflict in her eyes. The nurse's lips pressed together, her jaw tight, as if she was holding something back. Then, with a sigh, she finally spoke again, her voice trembling. There's a storage room, she whispered, glancing over her shoulder nervously. It's hidden on the lower floors. There are records, files, information that you won't find anywhere else. But be careful, Emily. It's not just about the accident. It's bigger than that. Much bigger. And if you go down there, you might not come back the same. Emily didn't hesitate. She nodded, her heart pounding with adrenaline. Where is it? Jessica hesitated for a moment before glancing around again, ensuring no one was watching. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, The basement. Take the service elevator. You'll find the door behind the storage closet. But remember, once you open that door, there's no turning back. With that, Jessica turned and walked quickly down the hallway, her pace quickening as she disappeared around the corner. Emily stood there, her thoughts racing. She had just gotten the most important piece of information she could have hoped for. The truth was down there, hidden in the basement, waiting for her to uncover it. Taking a deep breath, Emily walked toward the service elevator. Her pulse raced. But this time, it wasn't fear. It was anticipation. She was closer to the answers she had been searching for, closer to the truth that had been hidden from her for 5 long years. The elevator doors opened with a soft ding, and Emily stepped inside, her heart pounding in her chest. As she pressed the button for the basement, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being pulled into something much darker than she had imagined. But there was no turning back now. When the doors opened and the basement lights flickered on, Emily knew she was about to face whatever it took to uncover the truth. And this time, she wouldn't stop until she had it, no matter what it cost her.